Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Whodunnit, uh, the metafictional session for the Bad Crime Writers Festival. I'm just going to start with a bit of housekeeping so we can get that out of the way. We are meeting today on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Can I just extend my respects to elders past and present and also emerging, and also extend those respects to any other Indigenous people who might be in the audience today. The Aboriginal people of Australia were the first storytellers, and of course we are very privileged to be continuing storytelling on their land. Some practical details. Please ensure that your phones are switched to silent and turned off. Please feel free to take photos, tweet, whatever you need to do. If you are on social media, @BadCrimeSydney is the hashtag, or hashtag #BadCrimeSydney22. It's a very long hashtag. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, we will leave through those doors rather than the doors to the cafe. The security guards will direct you, so please follow their instructions. The assembly point is on the domain. Now, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Metcalfe Auditorium today for a kind of an unusual session. We thought that since we were talking about metafiction in crime and books which interact with the real world and know that they are books, that we might try something new and different and experimental. As I said to my colleagues at the beginning of this event, this could be really good or it could go really wrong. We hope it's the former, but if things go badly, we hope you'll give us credit for trying. Ben and I will be doing what's called a two-hander today. We're not really doing the traditional question and answer. We are trying to bring you into our books with the aid of our colleagues, and then we will be discussing metafiction in conversation. We'll be taking questions at the end, but if there is a burning question that you must ask, well, it wouldn't be a metafictional panel if we didn't allow you to jump in at any time. So please feel free to do that. So I think that's it for the housekeeping. So let the event begin. Can we take you now to well, we're not actually in the library, but we are in some shady hotel rooms or places where two men are writing. Dear Hannah, what are you writing? I expect you've started something new by now. If not, consider this a nudge from a fan. You have a following, my friend, desperate for the next Hannah Tagoni. To paraphrase Spider-Man, with great readership comes great responsibility. Seriously though, I saw an implausible country in the bookstore around the corner yesterday. A place called the Rook, one of those hipster joints where you get a half-strength turmeric soy latte and a wheatgrass and birdseed snack with your book. Anyway, the US jacket pops in the wild, in case you were wondering. Photo of it and the new releases shelf attached. I might have bought myself another copy, just so I could brag to the bookseller that I knew the author. I think she was impressed. There was a definite hint of admiration in the way she asked, "Do you need a bag?"
I'm not trying to be... Sorry. Can't hold both of these at once. We can imagine the typing sound effects. When I was faced with writing this down, difficult as it is with one hand, I realised that telling the truth was the only way to do it. Call me a reliable narrator. Everything I tell you will be the truth, or, at least, the truth as I knew it to be at the time that I thought I knew it. Hold me to that. For I am both Watson and detective in this book, where I play both writer and sleuth, and so am obligated to both light upon clues and not conceal my thoughts. In short, play fair. Actually, I'll prove it. If you're just here for the gory details, deaths in this book either happen or are reported to have happened on page 14, page 46, page 65, a twofer on page 75, and a hat trick on page 81. Then there's a bit of a stretch, but it picks up again on page 174, page 208-ish, page 218, page 227, page 249, somewhere between page 243 and page 250, though it's hard to tell, page 262 and page 355. I promise that's the truth, unless the typesetter mucks with the pages. There is only one plot hole you could drive a truck through. I tend to spoil things. There are no sex scenes. That's our first scene, so now we'll chat.
Now we'll chat. All right, characters off the stage.
So I guess, thanks everyone for being here, and a proper welcome to you, Sulari. Thanks for doing the introductions. Both our books, Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone and The Woman in the Library, for those who haven't read them, are books that know that they are books, right? And that's the very concept of metafiction or postmodernism. How do you introduce the reader to that concept when they're expecting a regular novel?
Well, I think for me, what I did was I used the framing device of a writer who is corresponding with a friend about the book that she's writing. So in The Woman in the Library, you open with a letter, and the letter is from Leo, who is a friend of Hannah's, and she's talking to him about the book that she's writing. But you'd never hear from Hannah directly. You only see the chapter that she writes in response to Leo's advice. So that's the structural element of how I frame this. The trick with it, though, I suppose, is always with every metafictional book, is when you are open with the reader, we don't pretend to the reader that this isn't a book. There is the danger of alienating you from being embedded or really caring about the story. So that's the tricky line to walk when you're writing metafiction. So how did you deal with it, Ben? Yours is actually different in that.
Yeah, I agree. The tricky line is there because there's actually 3 layers to a metafictional book. Yeah. And, you know, people throw around the phrase book within a book, but it's more than that, because you have the book that knows it's a book that is being written by characters in the book, yeah, and being read by readers. Yeah. So structurally, I was just fascinated by the fact that we read crime novels in first person, right? And the author has the audacity to pretend that there is suspense, that the main character might bite it, even though, logistically speaking, they have to come out the other end and sit down and write it all down, right?
Absolutely.
So one of that moment of somebody sitting down and writing it all down. And then when I realized that if he was sort of talking to the reader sort of more casually, then we're sort of moving into the fourth wall breaking kind of thing. And if you could sort of play around with crime conventions on that. A side note is that I love how that we've been talking about metafiction, right? And the phrase metafiction is in all the events that we do together, Sulari, but not postmodernism, because I pitched this book to my publisher and I said, it's a postmodernist novel. And they were like, oh, I don't know. And then I pitched them the exact same idea. And I'm like, it's a metafiction. And they're like, yeah, that sounds good. Well, it means the same thing.
You know, the reason for that could be very, very mundane. When this isn't the first metafiction I've ever written. My previous book, Crossing the Lines, was also a metafictional novel. And I was just writing a novel. And they sent the submission off to my American publishers, and they picked it up immediately. And they wrote back to me saying, oh, yes, we love it. We're taking it immediately. Here's a contract. It's a wonderful example of a postmodern novel. And I have to admit, I had to Google postmodern to figure out what I'd written. So it could be as simple as that. Yeah. Postmodern's one of those words that everybody's heard, but the definition eludes us sometimes.
And it's in a surprising amount of stuff, whether it's labelled postmodern or not. You know, Deadpool is postmodern.
Absolutely.
But if you say that to somebody, they'll be like, what? No, postmodernism is high and lofty.
Yeah, it sounds a lot higher and loftier than it is. So where did you begin? So I know what started off The Woman in the Library. It was a very particular incident. I was writing another book set in America, but I hadn't been to America for decades at the time. It was early 2019, and so I wanted a sense of, that sense of place that crime fiction is famous for. I had a friend who was an American writer who was in Boston at the time. And so I wrote to Larry and I said, do you mind if I pick your brain while you're in Boston? He was researching his novel just so that I can write this book. And he, in typical American largesse, said, of course, whatever you need, I can go look things up and go to places for you. And that was fine, though what I realized fairly quickly was that Larry's a much better researcher than I am. So not only would he answer my questions, he would send me menus and maps and weather reports. And then he started sending me pictures of the sidewalks. I could see how the snow plows kicked the snow up on them. And then one day there was a murder about 2 blocks from where he was staying. And he thought, Sulari's a crime writer. She might be really interested in what an American crime scene looks like. And so he went down there and he took footage after the body had been removed of this crime scene. And so in Australia, I received an email from Larry. Open the email, there's a file attached, open the file, and it's footage of a crime scene. And my husband, who happened to be standing behind me, said, gosh, I hope Larry's not killing people so he can send you research. And that was where this story became, this emanated from. I hadn't actually intended to write another metafiction after crossing the lines. So I'm really curious as to where Ernest came from and the snowy mountains. And
yeah, well, because a lot of your books, draw from the snowy mountains or Roland.
Well, I live in the snowy mountains.
Yeah. Number 4, the Roland Sinclair?
Number 3.
Number 3.
Yeah.
I just think it's, in terms of setting, it's quite simple, is that everyone's writing in the outback. I'm like, where else can I go? I'll choose something else around the country. But Ernest came from the fact that I just wanted to put on the page something that I hadn't read in a book before. And I wanted to try and be as innovative as possible, because I was sort of, it was the start of COVID and we're all looking at how sort of publishing works, and you're thinking about, will we survive this? Every industry was thinking about that. We were thinking about it in publishing, and it actually, did quite well through the pandemic because people rediscovered a love of reading. But at the start, we didn't know. And I was sort of sitting there just thinking, well, what if this is the last book I write? Like, what if this is just, this is my third, I write it, I don't do anything else. What will I regret not putting in it? And so my answer to that was to put everything in it. And I'd long had this idea, I know, which I almost hear the editors clench in the audience. But I'd had this idea for about 10 years of, can you spoil an entire book in the opening chapter and then revisit those spoilers throughout the novel and still maintain suspense and twists? And Ernest's voice, having him be, he's not a writer, he's a writer of books about how to write books. Yeah. So he's somebody who, the best teachers of failed artists. He's one of those, right? And so I wanted to do that, and his voice just sort of came naturally in there. And I realized the only way to do it was with a bit of charm and a bit of humor and a bit of a sly wink. If you're not bringing the audience in on the joke, then you're sort of putting up a wall between them. Again, that tricky line when you're doing metafiction, you still want to bring them into a commercial crime mystery, which I think, you're bringing the audience in on the joke when Leo and Hannah correspond, and then Hannah's subsequent chapters slowly morph based on Leo's feedback, which is absolutely bringing the audience totally in on that joke.
I think that's the wonderful thing about metafiction. It's a type of novel writing where you take the entire audience with you. It's not you don't deliver anything to the audience, you drag them into the story. There's in that sense. So it's a kind of the thing that I really loved about Ernest is that he is actually very charming and he's ordinary. So there's, and I wondered about that. Is it necessary then, when you're trying to entice an audience to come with you, you've got to have a protagonist who isn't, who is very easy for them to live with, whose eyes it's very easy to look through?
Yeah, well, I think editing wise, I definitely toned him down from the first draft. I think he comes across in my early drafts as he's a lot more he tells a lot more jokes,
Right.
which sort of pulls away from the fact
Okay.
that dozens of people are
Yeah.
kicking the bucket. And so I find it a mission to sort of pull that back so that he's completely relatable.
Yep.
But also, I think, you know, the relatability of putting metafiction in the commercial space,
Yep.
you have to, if you're satirizing a genre, not that either of ours are satire, but there are elements in which we're satirizing parts of the genre, you have to do that genre very, very well. And so you have to do the things that somebody who is reading this book is expecting it. You know, in my book, they have the big Holmesian Poirot denouement in the library where he tells each suspect what he thinks. And early on in the book, he says, don't worry, the denouement is coming. It happens in the library.
Yeah.
Because it has to happen in the library. Otherwise, if you satirize it too hard, if you don't respect, if you don't love the genre that you are aping, then you won't bring in those readers. You won't connect on that relatability level. So I found it quite a challenge and quite fun to try and hit all the tropes, but pointing out the tropes as you get to them so that you're satisfying both sets of readers.
I thought it was really clever in that Ernest doesn't lie once through the whole thing. He
chooses his words very carefully,
but he
doesn't
his words
lie.
so cleverly that you are misled. Even though you know that he probably is trying to mislead you, you're misled anyway.
Now, you said something clever in the green room about, and I'm
Just
interested in how the cleverness,
just
the one. I'm interested when you write a book that pretends to be clever or pretends to sort of have these elements, these metafictional elements. You said that the key to having a successful book is to have 30% of people hate it. And so I thought you should tell the audience that, because that was great. I loved it.
Okay, so I'm actually, so this is my 15th book. So I have somehow become an overnight success with my 15th book. And thank you very much. It's one of those things when people congratulate you for that. Having written books previously, it's kind of strange because I don't. It's my youngest child, but not necessarily my only favorite child, if you know what I mean. So I like to think that the books I wrote before that were also good books, but everybody's chasing that idea of what makes a book break out, what makes it suddenly become a bestseller. And my learning from this book is that you don't need everybody to love your book. You don't need 100% of people to love your book. In fact, you need about 30% of people to hate your book. Because at that point you have a conversation. So when if you think about a book club, if everybody in the book club loved the book, there's no conversation. Everybody just gets onto the wine and cheese very quickly. But if 30% of the people hated it and there's a fight, you have a really good meeting.
So everyone who hated Sulari's book to that side of the room, and then we'll have a conversation. So that's really good because it creates conversation online as well. You know, you're getting people who bounce off people's opinions, and it grows instead of, you know, the number of books you see which on the cover says the best thing you'll read all year, and it's like that doesn't actually mean anything. So I find that really fascinating.
It means you've got to have a thick hide, but crime writers have a thick hide, and you've got to be able to put up with people slinging. There's the book as well, and realize that that's just part of the industry that we're in. We write our souls onto the page and put it out for the world to criticize it, and we've got to be strong enough to withstand that. But really, it's the advice that I'd give to other crime writers is to put something in your book that leads to discussion, that's controversial, that isn't decided, that isn't, people haven't decided whether that's right or wrong, because that leads to the conversation.
Yeah. I often get, God, Ernest is annoying on Goodreads, which I don't look at. But, often it's like, would he just shut up with the chattiness and get to the mystery? And that's okay, because, that's a choice that we made. I'll misattribute this, but I think Stephen King said that quote that's, you can't please all of the people all of the time, or some of the people all of the time, so you may as well please some of the people some of the time, is how he writes.
Yeah.
I think we should do our second tableau.
So the library is open, ladies and gentlemen. An ordinary morning at the Boston Public Library.
The blood's from an injury on his neck, and you were carrying his feet. You didn't get a good enough look. That's not frostbite on his face. It's ash. Like charcoal, I said, out here. It's clogged in his windpipes, caked on his tongue. If we cracked him open, we'd find it in his lungs, I'm sure. It doesn't make sense. If it wasn't for the fact that he doesn't have a single burn mark on him and he's in an unmelted snowfield, I'd say the cause of death was obvious. Enlighten us. Andy was clearly unconvinced. He died in a fire.
Okay, actors, off.
Now, we chose those scenes because this is a bit less metafictional and more just about classical crime structures, because they both represent the conundrums in our book, the sort of golden age, impossible sort of mystery. So why don't you tell me a bit about your conundrum and how you arrived at it and what you wanted to get out of it?
It's a reverse locked room situation. So we have the people in the library sitting there. We know that one of the people sitting at the table, and it's now announced at the end of the first chapter, is the murderer. But they were all sitting there with each other when the murdered girl screamed. So that's your reverse locked room. So normally in a locked room, the murder happens within an area and nobody can get in and out. So the question is, how did the murderer get in and out and murder the person in there? So that's your conundrum for an ordinary locked room. This is kind of the reverse, because the potential murderers were all in the room, and the victim was outside the room. So the trick was, how on earth did they manage to kill her, or did one of them manage to kill her without leaving that table?
And you go so far as to tell the reader, you know, the line at the end of the first chapter. So hopefully it's not a spoiler, and I had my first coffee with a killer.
Yes.
One of them is a killer, and you've put them all at that table, and you've said it's not someone else, it's one of these four, and we're going to find it out, which adds to the sort of complexity.
It's a kind of crazy challenge. But, you know, the way I write, Ben, is it wasn't a thought process as such, because I'm a complete pantser. So I completely pants this book. I started writing from word one and just kept writing and let the story evolve and fall onto the page as it would. So... Thank you. And so, you know, for me, it wasn't really a thought of, I'll write a reverse lock room mystery in here. It's just that that's how it turned out. And then I thought, I've got a reverse locked room mystery.
So tell me, because a locked room, I mean, that's interesting that you're a pantser, because I'm very much a plotter. With a locked room, you need to know how to unlock the door. So isn't the risk of pantsing it is you get 3/4 of the way through and you're like, the room is locked. You know what I mean?
Yep, that's a risk. So the pantsers are the brave crime writers. And we always work with that risk. So, every one of my books has worked with that risk. And always at about 70% of the way through, I hit that point where I think the room is locked. I can't fix this. I have no idea how to deal with this. And it's at that point that you really need your courage, and you need to gird your loins and keep writing and hope that it'll come out. And for 15 books that has happened. It may go wrong on the 16th. I don't know. There's always that possibility, but it just is the way I write. So you plot this. So that must have been a mega plot. So you knew when you started writing how this is all going to work
I do
out.
about 70% of my plotting and then leave a little bit to discover on the fly. Because I think if you constrict yourself too much to plot, if you get stuck on it, even like I'm really bad at very small descriptions, like a character walking across the room and opening a door. And if I'm working off too tightly a synopsis and I'm struggling with the sentence of he walked across the room and opened the door because I think it's boring and I want it to be better, then the synopsis will just stare at me like, what are you doing, mate? So I leave it a little bit. But the book, I mean, so the title, Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, is true, and it's broken up into each section. So there's the overarching, there is a serial killer that is picking off family members at this reunion. But every single family member has killed someone, and it takes you through who each of them have killed by breaking the book up into sections: my brother, my sister, my mother, etc. And so it's got the overarching mystery, and then it's got 7 mini mysteries as we reveal who killed who. And then the question is, out of a family of killers, who's the murderer? But I had about 5 of them and I didn't have 2, and I sort of left them to discover later.
Well, the chapter I really loved, or the one that really sticks out, is I don't want to talk about it. And that was all it was. A chapter called I Don't Want to Talk About It. I thought that was brilliant. I spent the whole time thinking, what happened in that chapter? He's not telling us what happened.
Well, that's an example of, let me see if I can find it. Oh, yeah, I think it's chapter 9. So it breaks up into the topics. So you get the first death, and then you go into my wife, and this is who my wife is killed. And then the chapter is, I don't want to talk about it, which is authorial speak for I haven't figured it out yet. And I put it in as a joke, and I was like, I'll come back. And then it goes straight on to my father, who my father killed. And then I put it in as a joke because I didn't know who she'd killed. And killed is a very specific word. It's not everyone in my family has murdered someone. So, you know, I'm playing with the convention of guilt and what it means to take responsibility for something. And so there's a whole bunch of different paths I could go down, but I just didn't have hers. And I got there about 3/4 of the way through the second draft. I landed on what I wanted for that one. And so that's keeping the flexibility open. But with the body in the snow, like that's the trope. I talked about hitting the tropes, and I really wanted that Christie-esque conundrum in it. I wanted that locked room. The book has quite a fascination with locks. Every room that people walk into either locks or unlocks or has a broken lock on the door, etc. So even though the body's outside in the snow, I'm very much saying there's footprints here, so it's a locked room mystery. You can't get to it. And here's why it is impossible, and I will then make it possible. Which I think is fun.
Which is quite a magic of novels.
Yeah, absolutely. But you get tied up. Even if you're a plotter, you get tied up in, well, where did I put that? And this doesn't work anymore. And then it
I mean, I think part of the reason that I had never even considered plotting is I could see myself getting entangled in this web of plot before I ever started. And
so do you go back? I mean, as you pant, obviously you're laying the clues in as you come up with them, and it's in your head or you know, on a whiteboard or post-it notes. And then as you get to the reveal, do you go back in and feed more clues, or are you able to put in it all the clues you need?
I tend to be one draft.
Yeah.
Now, this is people have thought that was odd, and it is a little bit odd. But I have an even odder story as to why that works. So not only do I pants, but I need to watch television while I write, and I used to be really ashamed of this because it sounds like I don't care enough about my writing. I'll just, you know, write any old thing while I'm watching Midsummer Murders. But I always wrote better if I was actively watching television at the same time. And a few years ago, I ran into Kylie Ladd. I don't know if any of you have read any of her books, but as well as being a wonderful novelist, she's a cognitive psychologist. And she explained to me what was going on in my poor beleaguered head. And she said, what she said to me is the creative center of your brain is in your prefrontal cortex, and it's very hard to access your prefrontal cortex directly. So that's why when you lose a word and you're trying to remember the word, you can't find it, you go away, do something else, and suddenly it pops into your head. Well, I'm essentially doing that for 100,000 words. I'm going away and doing something else and letting my subconscious write the book. And so it feels very much to me like I'm watching Midsummer Murders. At the end of it, I have another chapter.
Could you write that down specifically so I can hand it to my wife? She's like, what is this video game helping you write? I'm subconsciously working through a plot hole.
Yeah. So lots of writers do it. I mean, some writers go jogging. So they just do other things. For me, it's watching television and just sort of distracting about it's always the same type of television. It's things like Midsummer Murders or Lewis that sort of got a steady rhythm.
Yeah.
That you can follow the story with about 30% of your brain. So I dispatch 30% of my brain to watch the television show, and then the other 70% actually works in the subconscious. And so I figure that there's something in my subconscious that's plotting and working it all out, because otherwise things just work out too well. And I should be hitting that, oh my God, the room is locked point that I can't resolve much more than I do. So I presume that the subconscious is doing all of that, and it's just not bothering to tell the poor beleaguered conscious part of my brain until absolutely necessary that this is what's going on. And so it feels to me like everything's just sort of organically appearing on the page or falling onto the page, and there's no actual plotting going on. So that's my theory. That's Kylie's theory. It sounds like a really good justification of
If you can't,
of the way I write.
if you can't surprise yourself, you can't surprise the reader,
Yep.
right? Like that's the basic tenets of it, which I believe in. And so much of writing isn't typing. That's
Yep.
the weird thing. I've been working on my new book for about 4 months, and I have an absolutely pitiful word count. Like, it would horrify the people who are interested in that. But I've been working on it for 4 months,
Yep.
you know, and it is there, and it's crystallizing, and it's working out, and it's, you know, I'm deleting things and adding things, and even if one day I just write 6 words, but they are going to be so important at the end of the book, you know, that's a good day done.
Yep.
So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, see, a lot of my thinking time is about backstories, things that never appear in the book. But for some reason, building that knowledge of characters and what's gone on before means that when you sit down and just type, it all comes together really well, because you're sort of, you know, building on top of a structure already. So I fully endorse daydreaming. I fully endorse watching television or jogging if you really must.
Well, you
but
never know what crime scenes you might stumble upon, and you can take photos.
Yeah, take a
It's always
dog.
the
you'll
jogger.
find
It's
it.
always the jogger that finds the dead body
or the
in
dog
Central
walker.
Park.
If you
yeah.
take your dog, you're bound to find a body somewhere.
Yeah.
I think
Well, on the topic of writing, we might move on to our next two below.
yes, indeed, we shall. Over to you. My dear Hannah. My dear Hannah, I took myself to a dive bar last night to absorb the atmosphere while I wrote. It made me feel like Hemingway. Ordered a mojito and took a seat at the bar. It was, to be honest, a little more divey than I anticipated. There was a fight during which one thug hit another thug over the head with a beer bottle, knocked him unconscious, and then left. The barman called an ambulance, and the other patrons just kept on drinking. Some of them had masks. They were wearing them like bandanas around their necks and foreheads. Anyway, I took a couple of photos of the unconscious guy's head, in case you wanted to describe Kane's wound in more detail. There were bits of glass embedded in the wound. I don't think you mentioned that in your description. The shards caught the light and glinted in the blood. Thank you.
I don't know.
Sorry, here's your microphone. I threw mine on the ground.
I think I underprepared the tableau for this one, but I'll just read a section from mine.
Yeah.
Chapter 27.5. I've always believed that there are more clues in a mystery novel than just what's on the page. A book is a physical object, after all, which can portray a few secrets that the author does not intend. The placement of section breaks, blank pages, chapter headings, even a cover blurb suggesting there's a big twist can, in revealing a twist is present, ruin an otherwise well-executed one. In a mystery like this one, there are clues in every word. Hell, in every piece of punctuation. If you don't know what I'm talking about, think about the book in your hands. If a killer is ever revealed with more than a leaflet of pages remaining against your right thumb, they cannot be the real killer. There is simply too much of the book still to be read. This spoils films too. The highest profile actor with the fewest lines is always the villain, and the sudden wide shot of a character crossing a road means they're about to be hit by a car. A good author must not only wrongfoot the reader within the narrative, they must do it within the form of the novel itself. There are clues baked into the very object. I have to be aware that you're aware that I'm writing all this down, is what I'm trying to say. So I think this one's interesting because I think we chose those because they focus on the act of writing. And the act of writing, I mean, we've mostly sort of covered this kind of stuff with your friend who sent you the photos, but the act of writing directly impacts on the plot of each book. So how important was the act of writing in The Woman in the Library?
Well, The Woman in the Library is a Russian nesting doll of writers. So you have Hannah, who's a writer, who's writing a new novel, Leo, who's an aspirant writer, who's trying to write a novel and who's writing to her. But then Hannah's writing a book about Freddie, who is a writer, who is writing in the Boston Public Library. And she's writing a book that involves all the other people who are sitting at the table as characters. And it's that, I think, one of the things about metafiction and postmodern novels is it deals with a writer's love for the craft. You can't write a metafictional novel unless you love the craft. And you want to write a book about writing itself. And I think, that's what comes through in Everyone in My Family has killed someone, and The Woman in the Library. It is about the craft of writing, the trickiness of it, the wonder of it, the difficulty of it, the honesty of it. And I know it can seem quite bizarre when you talk about honesty when what we're doing is we're making stuff up. But quite often, a novel is the most honest place where you can find how a writer feels about things, how a writer feels about violence, how a writer feels about
soy lattes in your opening chapter.
How a writer feels about their family.
Yeah, look, my brothers don't hold up well in my books.
No.
He started to notice. I think you get that window into the art of creation, but I think that as crime writers, we're constantly trying to divert the audience's gaze, and I think the best thing that metafiction gives you is the ability to put the author's gaze exactly where you want it, which means that they're not really seeing what you're trying to mask. So you can sort of do the twists quite efficiently because it is like a magic trick, and you want to say, look here. In the case of my book, look here, I know what you think is going to happen, and I know what you expect this scene to be, but it's going to play out differently, and then you play it out differently. But really, it's exactly what they thought was going to happen. You've just hidden it underneath it, or something like that. You can play all those tricks. I'll try and find a passage that I think represents that, if I can find it. But
I know the passage.
The pregnancy package. I'll find it.
Which is okay. So this. I think there is a wonderful sense of indulgence in writing about writing, because as much as writers have issues that we care about, in the end we're in this game because we love writing. So in metafiction you will get that. You will get all the joy and the difficulty that writers have in their work, and the kind of reverence that we have for it at the same time. So we wouldn't be crime writers if we didn't value the craft and you didn't value the rules. So as much as metafiction and what Ben is doing with the subvertive and Ernest telling you what is going to happen and then doing exactly that or doing something else, it's all about having respect for the old rules, the rules that have been tried and true over time, but still having the courage and the ability to play with that and to push that. And I think one of the reasons that works so well in crime fiction is that crime writers, as a rule, aren't precious. We're not precious about our craft, and whilst we respect what we do and we value what we do, there is no rule that can't be broken. And we are willing to take the mickey out of ourselves and to laugh at ourselves, and turn the eye back onto the writer as opposed to merely what we're writing. If you found that passage,
I haven't.
Ben.
You think I didn't even write the damn thing. Anyway, there's just a passage where a character throws up, and Ernest says to the reader, "Look, I know male crime writers. Often when a woman throws up in a book, it's a hint that she's pregnant."
Oh, yes.
because male crime writers seem to think that as soon as you get pregnant, the only thing you can do is vomit. But I want to point out that this is not the clue you should be paying attention to.
Yes.
And then her throwing up is actually a really important clue, but she's not pregnant. So that's all I was trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. That's.
But very well filled. Good improv. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, he's turning pages madly. Okay, so I think we are at time when we can take questions.
To be perfectly honest, sorry, just some relatable author experiences here for the authors in the room. Is I was flicking through it, and all I was thinking was, is this book really this goddamn long? What is it? Get to the point already. Where is it? So that's what I was thinking.
So what happens when you have a chatty main character?
Yeah, exactly.
Can I just open the floor to any questions if anyone has one? Yeah, so essentially, Ben put it beautifully. They're books that know their books. So the fourth wall is broken. We at no point it's a little bit like, in a normal novel, the reader pretends that they believe what's written is really happening, and the author pretends that what they've written is really happening. In metafiction, the reader knows that this is the book, and the author acknowledges that the reader knows that this is a book. Now, the trick with that, and that sounds fairly mundane, but the trick with that is to still bring you all that suspense and surprise and twists whilst you know that this is a book. So it gives you a second layer of work in there.
And it's also, in terms of books or films, it's a piece of art that understands its place inside the reality in which it is consumed, is the main thing about it. So, one of the best examples of it, which is not seen as metafiction or postmodernism, is when they swapped the James Bond actor from Sean Connery to George Lazenby. And the first scene is him walking along the beach. Is it George Lazenby? Anyway. And the first scene is him walking along the beach, and somebody says to him, aren't you that guy? And he says, no, that was the other guy. And they're saying, we swapped the actor, and we know we swapped the actor. And so that's the film telling you that it understands that you were watching the movie, and it understands there's a different actor, but it's still James Bond. So that's sort of the best, version of it that I see.
You see it a bit in the Homer Simpson things. Occasionally they break the fourth wall, and they speak plainly about the artifices that they have created within their genre. So that's exactly what this metafiction does. In The Woman in the Library, the authors talk about the artifices of the genre as if as if it's not impinging on their real life. And that's the same thing with Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone.
I love how you've just been sitting there the whole hour going, what the hell is going on? I had no idea.
Yes. No, I was very upset when Facebook grabbed the branding and went meta, but yes. Hello. Yeah.
I'll repeat. We can repeat it back. Yeah.
Look,
So
for
for
me,
those,
yeah.
So for those on Zoom, we've just had a question about the cover art and asking what sort of role it plays in representing the novel, and particularly the humour in both covers.
Yeah. So for me, this was my second cover. So the book was first picked up by the Americans. Now the American cover is very dark and literary. It's a black cover, and then it's got a woman's hands with a book open in it, and then the woman in the library written across. It's very reminiscent of the noir covers of about the 50s. And then of course the Australians got hold of it, and they did their own cover. And I remember when I first got sent the cover, I laughed for 3 minutes without stopping. Because it seemed to me the Americans were concentrating on the literary metafictional nature of the book, and its literary tropes and so on, and the fact that it was a dark crime novel, and the Australians just thought murder was fun.
It's very Hitchcockian. That's a Hitchcockian type of image as well.
So it was, it's there's covers. I tend to back off with covers because publishers know what they're doing. They know how to communicate to the market. So there's an entire language out there that we're not aware of. So apparently women in hats means historical fiction. Did you know that? And so there's codes out there that they have for books where they signal to readers without the readers actually knowing the code what kind of book that is. So clearly they've done it correctly because both the books have been signaled as humorous.
I think with this with everyone in my family, the discussion was how much humor to put on the cover, because I think up until recently, humorous crime or crime that sort of had a funny element was seen as more difficult.
Yeah.
And then books like The Thursday Murder Club and films like Knives Out have sort of come along and sort of rebranded that we were able to lean into the funniness. But similarly, I have a different American cover, and it was the first version of it was so gritty, and I'm like, did you read the book? Like, so my only notes to the cover designer were just, I want it to feel charming. I just want it to, do whatever you want, but just charm. And that's the thing we focused on. We fought a lot over the pigeon. There's a little pigeon. He wears a medal. His name is Frank, and he's in the book.
Oh, I just got the pigeon. Just then, I just got the pigeon, because I was just about to ask you, what the heck's the pigeon about?
And we talked about that a lot. Some people on the marketing team wanted it off. Some people wanted it on. And I was sort of like, whatever works. I think he's cool. And eventually we put him on there. And the single most, the highest volume of social media messages I get is people who haven't yet read the book saying, why is there a pigeon on the cover wearing a medal? And I'm like, or I'm a bird watcher and I love birds. And I'm going to bought your book because of the pigeon. I'm like, you're not going to enjoy it. But,
Well, and the cover has the same colouring as the Richard Osman books. So yeah,
which is not mine. They all do that.
No, but but there's all this sort of subtle signaling that goes on with covers that cover designers and publishers speak about that we are oblivious to.
And it's white because it was originally black, and it was sort of 8 weeks out from publication, like just enough time where they hadn't printed it yet, and the sales director walked into a Big W and every book on the shelf was black. And he was like, we're changing the colour to white because we want to be the white one, which is quite good.
And I think that was the reason for the very bright cover on this one, was that it would stand out against all the black, crimey books. So again, and that it was Hitchcockian. And I hope, obviously it's selling, so it must speak to the right sort of audience, but there is a very distinct, they changed the title of my book too. So not the Australians, the Americans. So originally I had called this book Letters from Leo, and then the Americans said, no, that sounds like a literary title.
Sounds like a Nicholas Sparks novel to me.
Yeah. So they killed that, but then they focus grouped the title from 100 different titles back down to the final 3, and then they allowed me to have some input in the final 3, but they did tell me that the woman in the library rated it 2 or 3 times the others. So if I was going to pick one of the other 2, it was going to be against the grain or against the public opinion.
We had my other titles. My first book had different titles in the UK and the US, and there was a lot of discussion. It was called Greenlight Here, which Lord went and released a song, which made it difficult to Google. But in the UK, they really wanted the word girl in the title. And this was 2018, so, girl on the train. And I was like, these titles all suck. And they're like, no, the word girl has to be in the title. And one of them was, I think it was as mundane as The Dead Girl. And again, the book has a dead girl in it because it is satirizing the trope. It's about the media that only... the dead girl gets the sort of the media thing. It sort of defines the value of the victim based on who they are. But this one, I called it Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. I pitched to my Australian publisher, and they were like, it might not fit on the cover. And, I want to say they're extremely supportive at every stage, but they were just like, just heads up, it's a long title. It might not fit on the cover. And then I just wrote it in, like, it's in every sort of, it's the opening line of the novel. It's talked about multiple times in the novel. And then I hand it in, I'm like, good luck changing it, So that's how you stick to your title.
You've got a long title and a long name, which is tricky for a spine. It's just long title, long name, a lot of words.
Well, I don't need a tagline. That's Everyone in My Family Has Kids on. It doesn't need a tagline. Whereas if it was called Mountain Murders, then you'd need everyone in my family has killed someone on the mountain.
On the mountain.
Yeah.
Which is,
Thank you. Great question. We've really run away with that one.
Yes.
Thank you for the question. For the people on Zoom, we've been asked about the genre of crime and how it plays into my book and if I did a lot of research on it. The answer is not really. The way that I always research, I mean, it's a lifetime of reading crime and all of those sort of, the major ones that you think. Murder on the Orient Express, Murder of Roger Ackroyd, Hound of the Baskervilles, The Hollow Man, or The Three Coffins, all those sort of classics of the genre sort of fed in to the point where, well, there's two parts to this, but to the point where some of the homages are accidental. I get emails and they say, wow, it was really cool how you did this joke about this book. And I'm like, I haven't read that book, so good on it. But if you're playing by the rules of the mysteries, then you're in the space in which the stuff that you are aping exists, at least in spirit. In terms of actual hard research, I do a lot of thinking and general reading across whatever topic my book happens to be about, but I don't like my books to be too research heavy. So I always just, this is the 4 months of writing, not typing. I just absorb everything and then it comes back on the page as a vibe. And that's my research. So it's the vibe of the genre, it's the tone, it's how it makes you feel. And so that played into it most of all.
Sounds like something from the castle, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's the vibe. You're right. It's the vibe. It's the Illuminati. It's Marbo. So yeah, that's that. And then I found the 10 rules, Ronald Knox's 10 rules. I mean, I found them doing some research. And I was just like, oh, wow, I have to write a book around these.
I'll be honest, I'd only heard of the 10 rules just before I read Ben's book. And that was because I had appeared on a podcast, Death of the Reader. Have you been on that? Yeah. And they are very big on what Knox's rules and what of Knox's rules you're breaking. Great podcast. But I had managed to write 14 crime books without actually knowing Knox's rules until that point.
They're also, they're terrific and also very outdated. You know, it's quite impossible to.
Yes.
A lot of modern, particularly psychological thrillers, which didn't quite exist. I mean, he wrote rule number 4, which is the detective must not commit the crime. Yes, he wrote that to make fun of his friend Agatha Christie for doing it in one of her books, which I won't say which one, but yeah. Yeah,
but she did in 2, I think. Good.
Again, there's the second one, yeah.
So it's those sort of rules are really interesting and they're outdated, and sometimes they're great to know for subverting. And I always tell people, rules are great for you to understand your genre because the rules are there for a reason, and sometimes it helps you subvert them when you know the reason that they are there. Now, we've been told that we're nearly out of
5
time.
minutes.
Is there any more pressing questions? We still probably have time for one if there is.
Yeah, down the front. We can squeeze 2.
I write the Roland Sinclair mysteries, so there's 10 of those, and they're very traditional Golden Age type mysteries set in the 1930s in New South Wales. And there was the Hero Trilogy, which was when I was writing Greek mythic fiction, and that's where I started. And so there was 3 of those books, and then there's Crossing the Lines, which is the metafiction I wrote before this one. And Ben, you have...
just for the people on Zoom, the question was, what other books have you written? I wrote 2 crime novels, rural crime novels, Greenlight and Either Side of Midnight. And then I've written a couple of standalone thrillers, which are just on the Audible platform. They're short novellas with big twists. So, yeah.
Yeah, I saw them. I saw the Roland Sinclair mysteries out there as well.
I'll sell you some of Sulari's from the boot of my car afterwards. You and I need to have words, actually.
Okay, so we did want to finish by introducing you to our wonderful actors and their books. We of course recruited from our colleagues in crime fiction. So the women in the library would you mind standing up, please? This is Petronella McGovern, whose book The Liars is just taking the world by storm. Ray Cairns with The Good Mother, which is a beautiful book. And Burr Carroll with her double shortlisting, Ned Kelly and Davitt shortlisted You Wouldn't Do It. Yeah, no, you had it coming. You had it coming, sorry. Thank you very much. And finally, the wonderful Michael Duffy, who has written many, many things. What's your latest, Michael? True crime? I remember doing one of my very first panels with you about 10 years ago in the Sydney Mechanics Institute. This, as you know, we'll be out signing books in the library part, in the bookshop part, but there will also be all the volunteers at BAD are writers and they have books, so they'll also be signing. So please feel free to support them, and I hope you do. They're all wonderful writers. The wonderful thing about for crime readers at the moment is that Australia is playing a very strong game in this genre. This is our third
couple of years.
Third? Is it third? Fourth? Fifth? Fifth.
But if we delete the COVID years, maybe that's what you're thinking.
Yeah.
You're mentally.
Yeah.
And everyone exit to that side of the stage, please.
Yeah.
Oh, we were told to go that way.
No, don't. Yeah.
Oop.
No, it's there. There. Don't go through the cafe. Go that way. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming. Really appreciate it.